right, welcome to another version of Two Volleys and a Guest. My name is Jerry Knapp. Be one of your hosts today, and our other host is going to be Tim Pillsworth, who I'm going to pass it to right now.
Hey, good evening, everybody, or good morning, whenever you're watching this. Welcome back. I think this is our third one now. We are still getting our feet wet on this, so we're trying to improve it as we go. We have a good friend and mentor and supporter, Mr. Jerry Herbst. We always introduce our guests because it's important, because what we found out in the past, people don't want to fluff themselves up enough when people deserve the respect. So I'll read it verbatim here. Jerry's a 45-year veteran of the fire service, is a New York State certified training officer and a past chief in his local upstate fire department, and he served as a deputy chief county coordinator. He's currently the director of municipal markets and training for Elkhart Brass. He travels worldwide in support of Elkhart field forests and end users, providing subject matter expertise on the evaluation, development, and implementation of equipment solutions for effective fire attack packages. Jerry's been published and referenced in industry-leading media, and he's an active instructor and supporter of many of our nation's hands-on training events. We see him at FDIC every year and supports us. And he's also one of the co-creators of Brass Tacks and Hard Facts. If anyone's not seen that before, it's a great little training video. If you need a quickie video for a training for your fire department, just like the training minutes, it's awesome to go to. Great engine company guy. And Jerry, welcome. You're the second big guest.
Okay.
Reason we wanted to reach out to you is you've supported us at FDIC in all our training. And a couple of years ago, with my old department in Washingtonville, we had a mishmash of nozzles, nothing bad. And we had issues with different nozzle pressures. So I came to you for some advice in what to do. And you really helped us with designing up a really nice nozzle package. So everything from our 1 3/4 to our 2.5, exact same series. We chose the XD series, which is wonderful, but also 50 PSI nozzles, which we found was really great. If you want to kind of like touch on the idea of why it's so important to have, first of all, the lower pressure fog nozzles, if you do use them, have come a long way. And that's a real important thing if you want to kind of start the conversation off like that.
Sure. Yeah, what I remember what we talked about is something that sooner or later everybody's going to go through if they haven't already. I think we were all kind of thumbprinted years ago with 100 PSI mentality, because that was pretty much what fog nozzles operated at. The 50 PSI has enabled the fire service by and large to flow adequate water at a fire with a reduction in nozzle reaction by comparison to the lower flows in 100 PSI of the past. The heat release rates of today's fire versus 30, 40, 50 years ago are just tremendously more. And the flow to overcome it is just not manageable for even a team of firefighters, let alone one, which is the reality. You need to be able to open up by yourself, in our experience. So standardization of tip pressure across a fleet is something that has also surfaced as something that needs to be addressed, because as the fire services transition from 100 PSI, they might have done it, a piece at a time. So you could have one crosslay with 100 PSI fog or an automatic or something like that, and another one with a 50 PSI smooth bore. So you're just asking for problems at the pump. People are over pumping and under pumping because there isn't a standard tip pressure across their fleet. I think one of the other things, if I recall correctly, very few people that we deal with have a target flow by line size in print. And that's something you were fairly clear on. You knew the flow that you wanted. So that kind of a transition is pretty easy. Oddly enough, a lot of times when you're working with people in this situation, they can actually increase their flow with a reduction in nozzle pressure, by going to 50 PSI, increase their flow with a reduction in nozzle reaction. So example, if they're flowing 125 at 100, they'll end up flowing 150 with less nozzle reaction.
Yeah, we found that important, and I quick ran some numbers just for, I'm an engineering geek, you guys can laugh. But if you think about 100 PSI fog nozzle at $1.80 gallons per minute, which is your 15/16, it's about 90 pounds of nozzle reaction, while a 180 at 50 or a 15/16 is about high 60s, under that magical 70 pounds, what everyone says a normal firefighter should be able to handle 70 pounds of nozzle reaction, where what we train on and teach on seems to work. What is your thinking? Is more people going to that around the country, or is it just kind of like hit or miss where depends where you go?
No, it's everywhere. You'll find pockets of different regions that are ahead of the curve, but by and large, nowhere close to everyone has made the move. We actually every 4 years when there's an election, it has nothing to do with politics, but we do a vote GPM survey, and we publish that. It has its own website, votegpm.com, and it's some really interesting information because it's 2, 3, 4,000 firefighters that respond and just answer questions like, what are you using for a structural fire attack for an 1.75 inch or 2.5? And you'll see some interesting information. There's a lot of 100 psi still being used, but it's funny when we interact with people in the field. Not everyone is up to speed on the whole hose nozzle pairing thing. That becomes a big part of it nowadays that never used to be there. And that is, when we were using 100 psi in the past, the rigidity in the hose we equated to attack capability, regardless of the flow. And as hose has changed, the pairing of the nozzle and the hose is absolutely essential, because if you go to 50 psi with a low quality hose, you're going to have whip conditions, and it interferes with your ability to be a nozzle firefighter. You have to choke up way too much, and then you got to shut down to move. It's just extremely dangerous.
I think that's an important point. Like, guys think, I got 1.75 inch. That's all I need to know about the hose. And I know Bill Gustin, and I think it was Mac McGarry years ago, sent me a list of the various friction loss in the hose, and it varies by a factor of 10.
Yeah,
and that's something I think we don't. So that your thought of pairing, I think, is critical.
Yeah, once you know what your flow is accurately, the math equations work for nozzle reaction and that type of a thing. But friction loss coefficients are not reliable math. I mean, you need gauges, you need a flow meter. When we all started, you look back 30, 40, 50 years ago, every hose manufacturer might have had, 2 or 3 inch and a halves, 2 or 3 inch and 3/4. Now they have like 10 or 12. The diameters, we all assumed hose had a true ID. It didn't. It expanded under pressure. And you can't really blame the hose companies. They did what the fire service asked them to do. They said, give us stuff that will blow up under pressure and collapses and packs neat. So, the sidewalls were compromised. It's not like it was old, double jacketed canvas with brass couplings. Back in those days, you never heard the term hose whip or nozzle whip when we were using brass nozzles. I mean, they were the boat anchors on there.
There wasn't enough whip to push all that weight, right?
No.
Yeah, but you also had more people on the line at the time where you, with that, remember the old Navy nozzles and some of those old boat anchors. It took a little bit to make sure you could actually control it.
Yep. And it's neat. I think historically, as long as I've been in, and I truly think I've probably been in about the best years that you could have been a firefighter with the changes that have gone through. Back in the day, it was a red line. It was 1.5 inches and a 2.5. It was pretty obvious what to pull, but errors were still made then. What we run into now when we get into areas where people haven't evolved in their attack packages, if they're using smooth bores, they're usually over pumping them because of whip conditions and poor hose. And if they're using 100 psi combination nozzle, they're under pumping it because the nozzle reaction is too much for decent structural flows. So, it's a design thing. When we work with an end user fire department, which is basically what our team does. Our field team, they're factory people. They can't sell a product, so they work on the spec and solve the problems, and then people buy from dealers. But very few people have that target flow. So we work with a committee, establish a target flow, encourage a 50 psi if possible, if they can match it to the hose. If not, you can get a little creative and over pumping things to get to where you need to be. You should never sacrifice the objective of the target flow. And the hose issue is never going to go away. And there's people that use, unfortunately, larger cities are sometimes like this. They bid hose like a commodity like toilet paper. A bid goes out for 1.75 inch municipal fire attack hose. There's no spec associated with no operating pressure tip requirement. Hose actually can be ordered with a written spec, just like a nozzle or anything else now. That's really what has to happen.
Jerry, I think your point of matching the hose and the nozzle leads to a bigger point. And Tim and I always talk about the fire attack system, from the intake side of your pumper to the discharge side of your nozzle. That whole system's got to work. And if it doesn't work, if there's a glitch in that chain, you're not going to get your target flow,
Yeah, absolutely. When we do when we're working in depth with the fire department, we open up the pump where we find pipe loss. You're right. Mm-hmm. Every single piece of it. And people we've never been taught to be obsessed by that. It's pretty, it's red, it's got the lights and all that kind of stuff. But once you look behind the panel, it's just plumbing, I mean, it comes in big, it needs to go out smaller, and we regulate all that. The thing I think what I try and superimpose on everybody is the importance that we've never been obsessed with the delivery end of that package. We're obsessed with the high dollar stuff. You're spending $1 million on a fire engine now, and we're more worried about what color red it's going to be than having a decent 1 3/4 attack package for a couple guys for something goes sideways at a house fire. Yeah. So that's always been our focus. And you guys share that. You've been looking at the things that impact that for years and writing articles about it, because it impacts the firefighter. We're not as good at the attack end as we should be, because everything that supports isn't lined up correctly.
Yeah, people like to talk about the sexy stuff. The sexy stuff is the fire truck. It's the new engine, squad, or ladder.
Yeah.
And I teach my PPE class. It's kind of the same thing. It's like people, I got gear, but they know every little thing about the rig. But the gear you're wearing is going to be protected the most. And do you really care if you got that $1.5 million engine or the one that's 20, 30 years old that pumps like a dream and gets you what you want? It really, it's more the ancillary stuff that has more importance, but people don't look at it that way, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I don't know if it would be great if every firefighter had the depth of knowledge, in their attack package and thought of it as the weapon that they use. But in my experience, and I mean, I interact and teach thousands of firefighters a year this exact subject, and the overwhelming majority have absolutely no clue what their target flow is. They assume the boss is going to call for the right line, and they hope the chauffeur pumps them right. Other than that, water comes out, they think they're doing a great job. And it's not their fault, because we're not teaching a sense of ownership in the attack package that I think we should.
Sir, you're still going out to departments, and can you talk about how you could help a department with the issues we're talking about today?
Yeah, the first thing we do is sit down and talk. Is find out what their objectives are. And what I do is I call it establishing a baseline. We just have them pull a line as if they were going to a fire, but we have flow meters hooked up to it. And we find out what they're truly flowing, and that's usually not what they think. Sometimes more, sometimes a lot of times less, depending on the design of the nozzle. It's not so much brand, it's design. And once we have that as a baseline, then we start looking at alternatives. Can we increase the flow with a reduction in nozzle reaction? But the reality we have to deal with is you can't expect your attack package to your A team or your rock star. You got to expect it to your weakest link.
Lowest common denominator.
Well, I was just up in Canada teaching. I got back the other night, and it's the same everywhere. I'll ask a class of in lecture 60, 70, 100 people, who's been on an overpressurized line, everybody raises their hand. Who's been on an under-pressurized line, everybody raises their hand. Who's pumped a fire, who's made a mistake pumping a fire. All the hands are going up. It's things we're in control of, but we don't, I think, realize how critical it is. So anyway, you get the baseline, you look at alternatives. Can you, number one, satisfy what it is you want to use? So your functionality has a lot to do with it. Some people want smooth bore and fog, and that's fine too. You can do a break apart or have one of each. We had to move towards, we have fog stems that are the exact same flows of all smooth bore sizes now when we released our XD product intentionally. Because there is no one nozzle that does everything, right? So you need a blend of stuff on the rig. People tend to be a bit more brand driven. I've tried to force them into design. We use Nozzle animations that we did for Brass Tacks Hard Facts that show a water path through a smoothbore, a fixed, a selectable, and an automatic. And people just don't understand even what they have. So it takes the time to do that. Once you set the baseline and get the base level of knowledge, so everybody's talking about the same thing accurately, then you go out and you do hands-on. You stand next to a firefighter, and if he's accustomed to holding on to, 75 pounds of nozzle reaction, and you put the same flow and it's 60, there's an epiphany. So and it has to be done hands-on. I mean, as firefighters, you can't do this on a PowerPoint. You can get them to the neighborhood on a PowerPoint. You're not going to get them to the address until you put it in your hands.
So you'll actually go out to their firehouse, and like you said, you did for a couple departments run by me, little half hour or so in the classroom just to get a background, and then like you said, you go outside, and you or one of your team members will do that for them, right?
Yep, absolutely. Every one of our regional guys probably flows water anywhere between 100 and 125 times a year, and usually with more than one department, because unless you're working with a city, and I do most of the larger organizations because they can be very lengthy trials, but we encourage them to bring the companies they do mutual aid with, because not only do you have to understand your attack package, you better understand your neighbors if you're going to their fires too.
Yeah.
Because today, you think about it, especially we're on the volunteer side, and small career departments are the same. You'll go to a job, and you're going to go relieve the engine crew or the truck crew. You're going with the engine crew. There's a line already in there. You crawl in. Okay, your vibra alerts are going off or switching. What are their target flows? What are their nozzles? And everyone's been to, I've been to different calls where you're like, wow, this thing is just not being pumped right. Like you're getting knocked around. I'm like, this is way over pumped. Or like, I could do better with a garden hose.
Yep.
And you get on the radio. I'm like, I go, goose it up. I go, you're way low. And that's what we try to figure out. Is it a pump discharge pressure? Is there a kink someplace in the line? There's things that can happen. And sometimes you need someone to chase back, and that fence or that car and the line got caught underneath the back tire that no one caught, which happens to all of us, even in residential areas. It's not just big cities.
Yeah, I'm that guy. I've actually on mutual aid calls, I take my own nozzle, ask them to shut down the line, and tell them what to pump it at. So I'm more than
little OJT, OJT. Yeah, good for you.
You're kind of like one of those guys. It's my ball. I'm going home.
I know what it takes for me to be effective, and it's not fighting nozzle reactions, it's fighting fire. So it does create some funny looks when you look up to a chauffeur to tell them that.
I haven't tried that one yet. I might have to do that soon. That sounds pretty good.
Oh yeah, bell hook to that carabiner on your belt, real easy.
Yeah.
The mutual aid thing is I don't think a lot of people think of that as, it would be ideal if the people you're working with and you all have the same equipment. So that's why we encourage, when we do a class and a hands-on event, to bring your neighbors, right? And not everybody, just bring the people that are, responsible for making sure things are right. But, I think the other thing that a lot of guys don't get is, the reality that you really have to be able to do it by yourself. If either one of us, it was a team and we went in and we were 2 or 3 bends to get on the fire, after the second bend, your backup's at the pinch point. They're not with you. So you have to be able to go full bend by yourself.
That's the fire service today. I mean, we've had a couple of fires over the past year or so where there's been enough where the guy, there wasn't too many turns, so it actually made it easy. But after that first tight turn,
yep,
you're done and you're humping back and forth, and it's a challenge.
Yep.
I think it's another key point. Like, we're in the shadow of New York City here, so it's like the backup man is always behind you. Well, that's great if you put 50 guys in the first alarm, but like we've all said, especially in the volunteer side, and you know what? There's no reason one firefighter can't handle that nozzle.
Totally agree.
It's a basic play. It's the standard we need to set. And we need to practice. Hey, Jared, something else you kind of mentioned very quickly, but the flow test. And in my mind, that's the key. Like, we go out, we'll You do a Monday night drill, whatever. You stretch a line, you flow water. Yep, everything's good. But you don't know how much came out the tip unless you measure it. Can you talk about the flow meters and how you do that and a pedo and that kind of thing?
Absolutely, and it's I'll give you the end of it before I start. I'll give you the end. The end is once you realize how valuable a flow meter is, not only for validating what you're flowing, but for teaching your drivers to be flow conscious rather than pressure conscious. So we were all thumbprinted wrong. We were thumbprinted with pressure. We equated a rigid 1.5 or 1.75 to good water. It had nothing to do with flow. It had to do with pressure. So, we always try and set up a flow meter on the intake side. We basically do an NFPA 1962 rig test. 1962 changed years back, probably 15, almost 20 years ago, where every pre-connected hose package on a rig is supposed to be tested annually. And if it's modified, it's supposed to be retested and has to flow what the authority having jurisdiction says it should flow. No one knows that. No one really does it, but that's our approach to it. So we set up a flow meter on the intake side with a pony length right into the, a 2.5-inch intake. And that way we don't have to move everything. I can test every outlet on the rig. Have them pull a pre-connect. I gauge it a couple different places. I'll gauge it where if it's a cross lay at the chick sand swivel, before water goes into the hose, I put a gauge there. And then I'll put a gauge at the midpoint. So if it's a 200 footer, I'll have a gauge at 100 foot and then one at the base by the nozzle. And the reason being is first thing we explain the difference between the big gauge and the little gauge, because most guys, especially on a one-line fire, are looking at the wrong gauge. They say they should look at the line discharge gauge, but inevitably you see their head go up to look at the master discharge gauge. So the difference between the line discharge gauge and the one that's on the chick sand swivel shows pipe loss between those 2 points. And it's usually more than people think. There's the value of opening up that compartment and taking a look at the pump, because you could have cross lays that sit right next to each other that are piped completely differently. And, every bend is going to have an impact. If it's a rear pull, they're normally fairly straight, and most big lines come off the back unless it's a complete rear pull engine. Front bumper lines are horrendous. You could have 25 PSI loss just in piping getting to the front bumper. Yet it'll be pumped the same as something that was directly on the pump. And then, so the difference between the gauge and the midpoint is friction loss in the first 100, and that one to the end is friction loss in the second 100. So we take it down to that level. Once you're set up and going, you're making the notes in these big Post-it notepads, but it tells a great story because you might find 10, 15 PSI difference in gauges. And that's only going to be for the rig that you're testing. Another one will be different. Fleets for large cities tend to be fairly tight because they have, fleet officers. So the specs are very tight, but in other parts of the fire service, you might have 2 or 3 different manufacturers of rigs or different capacities. But that's what we encourage. Everything is can't be done without flow meters and gauges. Theoretical math does not work anymore. I never really did. If you're using, friction loss calculations based on a coefficient that was in print somewhere, you're doing yourself a disservice. You need to do it with the hose you use on a daily basis. Put the gauges and the meter on there and find out what it really is. It's a myth buster. It's what it is.
We were actually testing 2 of the engines in Washingtonville. They're 3 or 4 years apart, almost identical spec. We had to replace a second one because of an accident. And we found we had the typical bumper line for trash fires, car fires, mulch fires. And we just put a fog nozzle on it, and we did flow test it to flow test it. And we found from engine to engine, same manufacturer, if you put the 2 engines next to each other, you can't tell the difference. And there was almost a 20 PSI difference rig to rig on the bumper. The other discharges were close enough to call them the same. Yep. We found out that the one had unusual bends, and they used the flexible stainless steel braided hose versus hard, and it was different. I expected maybe a little bit different, but not as much as we saw.
Yeah, but still, it could still be used as a structural line. But that's what you find, and it goes back to when I'm breaking the ice and having a conversation with people. That's why I ask them. You've been on an overpressurized line, you've been on an underpressurized line. It wasn't an act of a supreme being. It was either an equipment issue or a human made mistake, and that's the reality. So, I've worked with large cities that have 3 different length pre-connects and use one preset on a governor. And I ask, what one is it set to? And I get a stare. So there's issues.
So guys will say, "Oh, what's the big deal? 20 psi." It's stream quality. It's obviously GPMs, penetration, and it really comes down to kind of what, like we started out with. It's your basic fire attack play, and it's got to be right.
Yeah, it's critical. You're allowing me to say things that I normally say in a class, but I tell you what, when Chris and I were teaching, when Chris Martin and I were teaching one time, and he came up with a great analogy, and I use it all the time. I asked the entire room, who knows a cop? And I'm not knocking cops. My family, for the most part, was cops and firemen. But even the dumbest cop can tell you how many bullets are in the sidearm, can break it apart, can clean it, has to fire on the range, certify every year its condition of employment, right? And does the average working firefighter look at their hose and nozzle package with the same depth and seriousness? No. And, in a career of 25 years, the cops, how many times are they going to break leather and shoot somebody compared to how many times you're crossing the threshold, hoping preset PD pumped you right, and the boss called for the right line, and you end up living through the event. That's a lot that you put to chance.
Yeah. Well, so all those variables we talked about, the friction loss and the piping and that kind of stuff, that's stuff we can control before we risk our lives, and
absolutely.
Good point. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and with the under pressurization you talked about, that's a big issue with kinks where if the line's being flowed correctly, if you're going to flow your buck 80, but if you under pressurize that line, the line gets soft, it's easier to kink. Trapped underneath the door, stuck underneath the tire. Everyone's had the coupling at the front door. There's different techniques to kind of get that over to, the threshold, as they say. But everyone's been inside the line. You open it up and it kind of goes, and you're like, yeah, I got a problem. Someone go find it. Then you're kind of going back down the hallway. Then you're going back down the stairs. And you're like, I can't do anything right now.
Yep. Sometimes you got to fight with what you have because it's not an obvious problem. It's like you say, it could be caught up on the wheel of a tire outside. It's going to happen. It happens at every fire. That's why for my personal opinion, for what it's worth, I prefer flowing more water. I've always been a 15/16 guy too. I publicly declared that on the day of the nozzle on social media. Yeah, it was kind of a funny video. But because a kink, is going to take my water away. I don't want to be at the low end and have a kink and, be a kink away from getting my butt handed to me. I want something to be a bit more forgiving, and I'd rather go higher. And most guys I've ever been exposed to, senior firefighters that I ever talked to, will want as much water as they can possibly handle.
And once the fire is knocked out, you're not overflowing the fire. You turn a nozzle down. When it's almost down, you're just kind of wetting stuff down. You can gate it. You don't need to blast it every single time.
Yeah, and and you can even switch to a different tip. That's like the FDNY stack. I love the 1/2 inch tip for overhaul. You can do artwork with it, and that's what you do. I've evolved to the point personally, and it does bleed into my work life with Elkhart because we try not to teach tactics regardless of our experience, but I can share my own mistakes and realities. But all the years I was a boss, I think of it overwhelm and overhaul. I really don't want anything in between. A significant amount of water. I don't want it to be close. Punch it in the throat and mop it up.
Yeah. People talk about 180 gallons a minute is too much for target flow, and our friend Chris Flatley, a FDNY captain, Toph.
Oh yeah.
He says, I can make that 15/16 flow 90 gallons a minute. The first time he said that to me, I went, geez, how do you do that, Toph? He goes, I shut it off after 30 seconds,
Yeah.
So it's not hard. It's just like Timmy was saying, when you're done with it, shut it off, but you can't, we can't, go ahead.
The 150 or the 160 is, it works. It's just, if there is a kink, what are you down to, and we did the testing when we filmed our Brass Tacks Hard Facts. Kinks are real, and there's not going to be, there's not a consistent number or percentage that you're going to lose. Depends on the manufacturer of the hose, how old it is. There's a ton of things that can impact that, but it's going to happen. It's happened to us all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we found in the Kinks article, we found out a lot, and Jerry and Toth threw me on the bus on that. I was the first one. That was the first article I was able to take lead on. We found out that the smoothbore nozzle had less of a loss during kinks than some automatic nozzles because you got the plunger in there and the pit and all that. And we were amazed. We're like, oh, look at that wonderful stream quality. You know, looking at it, I go, we're flowing a little bit more than a red line. Where, let's put it this way, a booster line can put out a small fire. Everyone's seen it, and you know what it is, what it is. But you think you got this reach and stream, and you're like, I'm flowing the same amount as the red line.
Yeah.
And it's like because of a kink. And it was just amazing the data that we proved.
No, I was just going to say that, that comes that the average firefighter doesn't understand the differences in the designs and that those animations that we show, they show a selectable, a fixed, and an automatic, as well as a smoothbore. And, when you look at that if you're a committee that's evaluating change that we're working with, we show that, but then we talk about the positives and the negatives of every single design. Because, you're basically speccing it to your weakest link, right? I refer to the guy as mask malfunction Mikey because everybody has one, right? They have to be able to do it and put a knock on a fire. So you can't spec it to your rock star.
Yeah, that's one of the problems we're seeing now. Well, you can pump it at 50, you can overpump it, you can underpump it, you can do this, you can do that. We need to have a basic play that's going to work every time. And personally, 15/16 would be my choice. If a department decides they want to use 7/8, I think that's fine. That's their plan. They know if they're inside and they're not making enough progress, get another one, get a bigger one, do something different. But being consistent, like you said about Mikey there, you got to be consistent, and you got to weed out those variables that we just talked about.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that Vote GPM website I was talking about, 7/8 is the best selling tip on an 1 3/4 for smoothbore. The only place the 15/16 remains the first choice is in the Northeast, driven by the city. But they're getting, you got to be careful if you're going to copy an urban standard. You don't have the same staffing. You're not putting the same amount of rigs on the box. In the mutual aid arena, you're inviting 5 or 6 companies. It's 2 guys per rig. All that iron's parked. You just need bodies. And that's the same anywhere. But yeah, the safety of a consistent tip pressure with a target flow that's in print, that everybody's achieving the flow, regardless of the rig's design. It forces people to be a pump operator. Oh, well, that's what you have to be. The preset doesn't solve everything. A preset's great for a one-line fire, if in fact that's set accurately.
Yeah, and also like the 160 is always kind of scary where, like I want to cheat. I want to go in and get it. If you can actually flow 180 and train your people to handle that nozzle reaction, you've got it licked. They might have to work harder at a 160 flow or 150 because instead of me overwhelming it, I'm going to have to go in and keep getting it. Where if you go in with a $180, you overwhelm it so fast, it's actually safer in the long run. It's actually easier because the nozzle's not flowing as long. It could be easier and less stressful in the long run.
The devil's in the details too. What kind of fires are we talking about? If you have an average residential fire, 7/8 is probably going to do it for you. A couple of rooms, right? But you get into problems. You get a hoarder house, or you get into
McMansions.
Yeah, maybe you stretch that into. I'm not saying you should, but maybe it's some kind of mercantile or commercial. You stretch that. That 7/8 isn't enough there, so you don't have that any margin of safety,
Yeah, and that's the flow becomes the organization makes a choice. My stance is 150 is the minimum for structural work. As long as you're above that, you can make it work regardless of your staffing. And 250 or above on a big line. Just that that's why I'm saying get it in print. Don't let it be a variable.
Yeah, true.
We've had some fires we went to that with a McMansion with a big vaulted ceiling and the big staircase in the back. And he came in, there wasn't much heat at the front door, opened up the line, and it was almost over my head, and nothing was coming down. I'm like waiting for the officer to come with the camera. I go, look over our heads, and it was just ablaze. The vaulted ceilings, It doesn't even have to be the massive houses anymore. The big open floor plans, when rooms were compartmentized, you can get away with a lot less flow because less is burning in one area. That bigger flow, you get a vaulted ceiling or something like that. You could have the house that doesn't look like much could have a lot more area and BTUs being stored than you might think.
Yeah, and that's so true. I try and say that a funny way in a class. I ask if there's anybody over 50 in the classroom, and everybody always is. And I said, I bet you that you couldn't see the front door of your house from the kitchen in the house you grew up in. All right, but the house you're in now, you certainly can. You can just tell the Amazon got to drop the package. You can holler at the dog out on the deck, and the kids are down the hallway. Everything's an open floor plan. It can be the same square footage, but it's a completely different fire.
Yeah.
And then look what it's full of. It's methyl ethyl bad stuff. It's a B fire in an A box.
It's solid gasoline, as Andy said. It's gasoline burns at about 18 to 20,000 BTUs per pound, where wood and cotton's 3 to 5,000. So there's your difference right there.
So we've kind of beat up your first 1 3/4 attack line. We always talk about small, medium, and large. Medium, 2.5. Kind of, you want to do the same thing with it, and probably with your portable deck gun, your RAM monitor. Jerry, can you talk to the bigger lines a little bit? And
Sure. It's the same caveat. Target flow in print. Most people, there's the majority of the fire service is using a solid bore on a big line, but there is still a lot of fog nozzles and even higher pressure ones. They don't get pulled frequently because it's like pushing back on a locomotive. It's just crazy. But the approach is exactly the same. So you document the flow, you put it into a marginal firefighter's hands. Can they manage it? I think the problem with the big line is we still don't teach people, I think, what we should. When you went through Firefighter 1 or EF, whatever vintage you are in New York, I mean, you certainly were taught how to do a knee pin by yourself on a 2.5, but we've all had to do it at a fire. Wouldn't it be great if we actually taught people that? A 2.5 is a big line. You need technique. If you don't have technique, you don't need a bunch of bodies. But the criteria is the same. It's got to be spec to the weak link performer. Nozzle handling with the big line is not as forgiving as it is with an 1 3/4. We all know that. The RAM and the personal attack monitor has become such a game changer in the fire service because, as the fire evolves, how we used to say, I used to say when I was a chief, we layered the fire. You see the 1 3/4 down, 2.5 on top, ladders in the air and the house is on the ground. So it's like we played catch up the entire time. It gives a single working firefighter the ability to flow significant water, up to 500 gallons a minute, with zero nozzle reaction in a stationary position.
Yeah, that knee pin is such a simple technique, but again, everybody's short of manpower. We rolled up to his 4 or 5 bed garage going. We were second to a mutual aid. These guys are just wrestling with this 2.5. And I said to them, put it on the ground and kneel on it. And they looked at me like, what? I go, I'll show you. And they're like, wow, this is pretty cool. Again, a simple, technique that you just got to know,
And that, I think those are the things we should be teaching, in the firefighter ones and that type of thing, but we're not. So, they learn that the hard way. But, those are the realities that bosses have to, especially training people, have to look at. You better cover that stuff in training. When you're asking a guy to do it at a fire, it's not going to go well unless you've drilled on it.
Yeah.
But the big line approach is the same as the 1 3/4. The RAM attack monitors, we look at them. Unfortunately, majority of people look at them as a defensive tool. It's an offensive weapon. It's mobile. It's rare these days to see somebody go through the evolution of a 2-piece deck gun, getting it out, passing it down to another firefighter, dig out the ground base, hand jack to it. It's a 4 or 5 minute operation where you can deploy a RAM in the same amount of time it takes to deploy a hand line. Even if you're challenged for manpower and you pull up and the whole world's on fire, you got a deck on, you got a single firefighter doing a knee pin on a 2.5, and you got a RAM. You can flow the capacity of the fire engine in like 60 or 90 seconds.
What kind of flows are you talking out of the RAM, Jer?
Its max is 500. We offer a couple different tips on it. I prefer the stack tip because it gives options. You're seeing a lot of this mid-rise type construction happening now, which is extremely dangerous. I think this is the mid-rise is the 2.5 story wood frame of the future. It's going to be the fire. They're lightweight construction above, the masonry. And it's not a fire that you can get to a top floor fairly quickly. It's going to be, a well hole stretch or a coupling drop or something like that. So an outside hit of water could make sense. I don't think it needs a deck gun. And the truck is normally going to be, the front goes with the truck. So you might not get a shot with a deck gun. A ram makes good sense. I show it intentionally in some classes I do with a 1-inch tip. But a 1-inch tip at 80 pumps, it flows the exact same as a 2.5 with 1.125 inch. It flows 265. But the difference in the streams is drastically different. One of the things that we lost when we went to the 50 psi handline attack was velocity and reach. And in a footprint of a wood frame dwelling, you don't know, right? You were fighting a fire 15, 20, 25 feet away. But 80 psi, we normally only think of for master stream defensive operations, but it's an offensive pressure. If you need to do a vertical hit to knock something back, give you time to transition up to a fire floor, a smaller tip pumped at 80 is like a laser beam. It's going to change conditions quickly. And it doesn't consume, two of the most precious commodities I think you have in that situation are time and water, especially if you're working off a tank. So, 500 would certainly do it. But if you can get it done with, 250, 265, that makes sense. Now you got water for the hand line. It's all about, I think, making a hit in a manpower challenge situation is make a hit on it to get it to the point where it's hand line manageable. That goes back to that overwhelm and overhaul.
Get the jab to the nose to basically knock it down to its place.
Yeah. You guys have all ran fires. When I was running fires, I want to hear we got a knock on it. I know there's a ton of work left to do, but if you get a knock on the fire, there's 2 levels of intensity. You're now to the second level, and there's not a lot of intensity. It's basically an overhaul fire. So it's overwhelming overhaul. And that's
once a fire goes out, everything gets better. Yeah.
We really haven't mentioned it, but putting the fire out increases the chances of survival of the occupants.
Absolutely.
Makes our search a whole lot safer. We're not too worried about flashing over and backdraft and those kind of things. This fire's knocked, and we can be more effective at our job. So I'm not telling everybody to stretch a line, put the fire out, and then look for victims. But put the fire out, everything gets better, like Tim said.
In my experience, I was taught rescue, confine, extinguish, and overhaul, and most rescues, extinguishment is a component of the rescue, right? Anytime you put water into a box, you're going to contract the space. It's better for the people that are in there, and it's easier on the firefighters making a push. I'm not advocating, that before going for a victim, but what I am saying is there's the understanding of the weapon, the science that we have now. If you look at the UL studies, Fire Safety Research Institute, things like brass tacks, hard facts, training minutes, all the material that's available to the average firefighter that was never here 30, 40 years ago, to understand what that water is doing. Shame on us if we're not sharing that. And that helps them, I think, get a deeper understanding of the delivery end of what they're obsessed with the nozzle they're holding. It's the delivery end that they need to be worried about. It's the tip of the sword. Where's it going? What's it doing? It's like the air movement work you guys did. You get in there and, everybody wants to go too fast, way too quick. It's like, slow down. Think it's foreplay. Like,
and let the weather do the work.
Yeah. You can outpace your stream pretty easily, it's going to hurt.
So we're getting close to the 45 minutes here where we try to keep our spitball target, because I know my attention span can last longer on this, because how many times have we sat at a bar at FDIC and talked this until
because we're engine nerds.
Yeah, we're nerds. I'm the OCD dyslexic engineering geek. So to wrap things up, Jerry, what for any department out there that's looking, we're looking at to do it where I move back to now. What would you recommend, and how would they go about doing that?
I think a couple of things. Sorry, I didn't know which Jerry you were talking about.
No.
I can't contain myself. I'm sorry, Jerry. I think I guess you guys are nerds. I'm psycho. I don't know, But anyway,
April's coming, Jerry. April's coming.
Oh, please. I got so much on my plate now I can't deal with. But I think your point, Jerry, like brass tacks and hard facts, it's free. It's a click of a button. Call email Jerry Herbst. He'll come and help your department out for free. The UL stuff is for free. It's a click away, and it's stuff that we'd have killed for when I first started the fire service, because what did we go on? Oh, Jerry tells you how to put the fire out, so that's the way it is. Well, I tell you how to put the fire out. 30-degree fog, whip it around, fire goes out, kid. Okay, that's all I need to know.
Why are my ears melting off?
Yeah.
So we had expensive learning years, guys. The test came ahead of the lesson.
Yeah. So use all that stuff. It's free. It's a click away, and that's my bottom line.
The level of support that manufacturers can offer, they should look at. There's, we intentionally sell through distribution so that our people aren't sales identities. So, when one of our guys shows up with a truck and all that stuff, you've got everything you need to validate flows and test and compare and that type of a thing. Utilize that, bring in hose guys, bring in nozzle manufacturer and get accurate information. Don't cut and paste somebody else's work. It takes work to get it done right, but it has to be based on your reality, not your neighbors. And definitely not an urban fire department if you're not an urban fire department. And it takes time. These things are expensive. Hose and nozzles are expensive. A lot of people can't do both at the same time. So some thought has to go into, okay, what do I do with the hose I have? What do I do with, the nozzle if I want to change it when I do get new hose? And you're going to need some help with that. So, that's what our guys love doing. Reach out. It's not threatening. Get the information you need to make an educated decision. Get past the glitz and the frosting. It's like, oh my gosh, it glows in the dark and they'll etch it for us. Okay, well, you should be more concerned with what it flows first. Get that part right. Get a target flow in print. And the safety of standardization across the rig. That's our approach to it.
Great. Well, I guarantee we'll probably be reaching out to you in the future because there's so much more, being engine geeks that we are. Very much thankful for you to show up and share your knowledge, and especially for the brass tacks and hard facts. You've taken stuff that Jerry and I have been working on for over 20 years. Yeah, we are all that old. And if you guys go out to FDIC, you go to the Elkhart booth, and these guys are here, and they'll answer any questions out there. And it's just a great knowledge to have someone think about the way you are. And very appreciate your time. Up in your office, I know you want to hang out with your new grandchild as much as you can. I can see the smile already because I saw the pictures out at the dinner. Yeah. So we'll look for more stories.
Well, I appreciate the chance to be a part of it. Talk shop, it's always fun. Especially because I get some personal opinions. But the advice is use your lifelines. You don't have to be a wizard. There's people out there to help you get to where you need to be. You just have to ask.
Chris Toph would always say, "I got a guy," and thankfully we know a couple of guys which really help us out, and you're definitely one of them. So thank you so much.
Okay. No, my pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim.